She whispered those words, "Don't take off my dress," with the last breath of someone who'd already died 1,000 times. But when the Apache warrior peeled back the blood-soaked fabric, he found more than wounds. He found a secret burned into her skin, a mark that told a story of monsters wearing human faces. This is the tale of Elenna Rae, the girl who survived the unthinkable, and Takakota, the warrior who taught her that survival wasn't enough, she had to learn to fight back. Stay with me until the end of this journey and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elenna's story travels across the world. The prairie stretched endlessly under a bruised sky, the kind of twilight that swallowed hope whole. Takakota moved through the tall grass like smoke, his moccasins silent against the earth. His ancestors had walked for generations. He'd been tracking the wagon train for 2 days, not to raid it, but to understand why white men were crossing Comanche territory without tribute or fear. The wind carried the smell first, blood, sweat, and something worse. Death had a particular scent, and it clung to the abandoned trader's wagon like a shroud. Takakota approached with his hand on the knife at his belt, eyes scanning for ambush. The wagon sat crooked on a broken axle, its canvas torn and flapping in the breeze. Goods were scattered everywhere, flour sacks split open their contents, mixing with the red dirt like bone meal. But it was the chain that caught his attention. It stretched from the wagon's undercarriage into the shadows beneath where the dying light couldn't reach. He crouched low, peering into the darkness. That's when he saw her. A woman lay crumpled in the dirt, her body twisted at an angle that spoke of pain and exhaustion. Her dress, once perhaps white or cream, was now the color of rust and earth. Her wrists were raw and bleeding where iron shackles bit into flesh, and the chain that bound her rattled softly as she breathed. She was alive, barely. Takakota's jaw tightened. He'd seen many horrors in his 32 years, war, starvation, the systematic destruction of his people. But there was something about the casual cruelty of chains that ignited a particular kind of rage in his chest. Animals weren't meant to be shackled, and neither were human beings. He reached for her, and her eyes flew open. They were gray, he noticed. Gray like storm clouds, wide with terror and something deeper shame that ran so profound it had become part of her bones. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry as desert stone. "Please, don't take off my dress." The words stopped him cold. Not "don't touch me," not "help me," but "don't take off my dress." What kind of hell had this woman survived that her first plea was about modesty, about dignity, when she was half dead beneath a wagon in the middle of nowhere? Takakota said nothing. He never wasted words when action spoke louder. He examined the shackles, old iron, the kind used for slaves back east. Though slavery was supposed to be over, the lock was simple but effective. He could break it. "Who left you here?" he asked in English, his accent thick but clear. He'd learned the white man's tongue from a missionary woman years ago, before the wars grew too bitter for such exchanges. The woman's eyes darted past him, searching the horizon, as if expecting monsters to materialize from the grass. "They're gone," she breathed. "They left me to die." "Why?" She closed her eyes, and a tear traced a clean line through the dirt on her face. "Because I'm used up. Because there's no profit left in me." The words hung in the air like poison. Takakota pulled his knife. She flinched violently, and he paused, letting her see that he was aiming for the chain, not her. The blade was sharp, forged from steel he'd taken from a cavalry officer years ago. He positioned it against a weak link and applied pressure, leveraging his weight and strength until the metal screamed and finally snapped. The chain fell away with a sound like judgment. She didn't move. Even free, she remained curled beneath the wagon, as if the shackles had been the only thing holding her together. "Can you walk?" Takakota asked. I don't know." He reached for her arm gently, always gently, and helped her slide out from under the wagon. When she emerged fully into the dying light, He got his first real look at her. She was young, maybe 25, with hair the color of wheat that hung in matted tangles around a face carved hollow by suffering. Her dress clung to her body stiff with dried blood, her own or someone else's, he couldn't tell. The fabric was torn at the shoulder, revealing more bruises, and her bare feet were cut and bleeding. But it was her eyes that told the real story. They were empty in a way that had nothing to do with death, and everything to do with having survived when dying would have been easier. "My name is Takakota," he said, "because names mattered, because identity was the first thing they tried to strip away. I'm going to help you, but we need to move. This place isn't safe." "Nowhere is safe," she murmured, but she let him support her weight as she tried to stand. Her legs buckled immediately. She hadn't walked in days, maybe weeks. The muscles had forgotten their purpose. Takakota didn't hesitate. He swept her up into his arms. She was far too light, all bone and will with nothing in between, and she made a small sound of protest that died in her throat when she realized she had no choice. "My name," she whispered against his chest as he began to walk, "is Elenna. Elenna Rae. Elenna Rae," he repeated, honoring the trust of her name. "Hold on." The desert stretched before them, painted in shades of amber and shadow. Takakota knew these lands the way other men knew their own hands. Every canyon, every water source, every place where the earth offered shelter from the merciless sun. There was a cave system half a day's walk to the north, hidden among red rock formations that looked like the fingers of ancient gods reaching toward the sky. He would take her there, and then he would decide what to do next. Elenna drifted in and out of consciousness as he walked, her head lolling against his shoulder. Sometimes she mumbled words he couldn't understand, names perhaps, or prayers. Once she cried out, her body going rigid with remembered terror, and he had to stop and speak softly until the nightmare released its grip. "You're safe," he told her, though he knew the words were a lie. No one was ever truly safe, but sometimes the lie was necessary, a bridge between one moment and the next. The moon rose full and bright, turning the desert silver. Takakota's legs burned with exhaustion, but he didn't stop. Warriors learned early how to push past pain, how to make the body a tool rather than a master. He'd once walked 3 days without food or water while carrying his wounded brother to safety. This was no different. Except it was different, and he couldn't quite articulate why. Maybe it was the way she'd said, "please," maybe it was the chain, or maybe it was simply that in her brokenness he recognized something of himself, the part that the world had tried to destroy, but hadn't quite succeeded. By the time he reached the cave, the moon was high overhead. The entrance was narrow, hidden behind a fall of scrub brush that he pushed aside with his shoulder. Inside, the space opened up into a natural chamber about 20 feet across, with a ceiling high enough to stand in and a floor worn smooth by centuries of wind and water. He laid Elenna down carefully on a flat section of stone, then immediately set about building a fire. The nights grew cold this time of year, and she was already shivering despite the lingering warmth from his body. The fire caught quickly, fed by dry brush, and a few precious pieces of wood he kept stored in the cave. As light filled the space, he finally got a clear look at the woman he'd rescued, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Her dress was worse than he'd thought. The stiffness wasn't just dried blood, it was blood dirt and other things he didn't want to name. The fabric was rotted in places, held together by little more than habit, and beneath it he could see the outline of bones that shouldn't be so prominent, skin that was mottled with bruises in various stages of healing. But that wasn't what stopped him. It was her silence as she stared at the fire, her expression completely blank, as if she'd retreated so far inside herself that nothing could reach her anymore. "Elenna," he said softly, "I need to treat your wounds, but I need to remove your dress to do so properly." She didn't respond, didn't even blink. He tried again. "I know you asked me not to, but if I don't clean these injuries, infection will set in. You'll die." Still nothing. Takakota sat back on his heels, frustrated. He'd seen this before in captives. who'd been broken so thoroughly that their minds simply shut down. The body continued living, but the spirit had fled to some unreachable place. "I give you my word," he said, speaking now as much to the fire as to her. "As a warrior of the Numunu, I will not harm you. I will not dishonor you. I am simply trying to keep you alive." Something flickered in her eyes, then a spark of awareness, or maybe just recognition that words were being spoken. "Why?" she whispered finally. "Why what? Why are you trying to keep me alive?" Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Why didn't you just leave me under that wagon? It would have been easier for both of us." Takakota considered the question. It deserved an honest answer, because I've spent my entire life watching my people die from disease, from starvation, from bullets and broken treaties. I've watched the government push us onto smaller and smaller pieces of land, watched them kill the buffalo that sustained us, watched them try to erase everything we are. He met her eyes. "So when I find someone still breathing, I don't walk away, even if they want me to." Elenna was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "Do what you need to do," she said quietly. Just go quickly." He nodded and reached for the hem of her dress, but she caught his hand. "You'll see things," she warned, her voice trembling now. "Things that will tell you what I am, what I was." "I already know what you are," Takakota replied. "A survivor." She laughed, then a broken, bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor, but she released his hand. He worked quickly and methodically, the way he would dress a wound on the battlefield. The dress came away in pieces, the fabric so damaged it was beyond saving. He kept his eyes clinical, focused on injuries rather than flesh, on what needed treatment rather than what the wounds implied. But he couldn't ignore everything. The bruises that ringed her ribs told stories of fists and boots. The rope burns on her ankles matched the ones on her wrists. There were other marks, two long, thin scars, that spoke of whips or knives carefully placed to cause pain without killing. And then, as he turned her slightly to reach a gash on her side, he saw it. The brand. It was on her left shoulder blade, about 4 inches across. The flesh was raised and twisted forever, marked with the symbol of whoever had owned her. A stylized letter H with a circle around it. Harrow's mark. Takakota's hand stilled. He'd heard stories of this brand whispered around fires and in the dark places where men traded secrets. Harrow was a name that inspired fear, even among the fearless, a slaver, a murderer, a man who'd built an empire on the suffering of others. The war might have ended slavery, but men like Harrow had simply taken their business underground. "Now you know," Elenna said softly, though she couldn't see his face. "Now you know what I am. Property, merchandise, used up and thrown away." Takakota said nothing. He continued working, cleaning the wound on her side with water he'd heated over the fire, then moving to the others. He'd brought herbs with him, sage yarrow, others whose names existed only in his language, and he made poultices, applying them with hands that were steady, despite the rage building in his chest. Not rage at her, never at her, rage at the men who'd done this, at a world that allowed it to happen. When he finished, he wrapped her in a blanket he kept stored in the cave and gave her water to drink. She took small sips, her throat working slowly, as if her body had forgotten how to accept kindness. "Thank you," she whispered when he pulled away. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "We still have to keep you alive through the night." She smiled faintly. "I've survived worse nights." "I know." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Takakota made a simple stew from dried meat and roots and convinced her to eat a few bites, even though her stomach rebelled at first. Food was medicine, his mother used to say. The body couldn't heal without fuel. As the night deepened, Elenna's eyes grew heavy. She fought against sleep, her body jerking awake every time she began to drift off. "You can rest," Takakota told her. "I'll keep watch." I can't," her voice cracked. "When I sleep, I'm back there, in the cellar, in the darkness. I can feel the chains and hear his voice, and then I'll wake you, he interrupted gently. If you cry out, I'll wake you. You have my word. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for lies. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded and let her eyes close. Within minutes she was asleep, her breathing evening out into a rhythm that wasn't quite peaceful but was close enough. Takakota fed the fire and settled in for a long night of watching. He'd meant what he said. He would keep her safe while she slept, would wake her if the nightmares came. But as he stared into the flames, his mind was already working, already planning. He thought about the brand on her shoulder, about the men who'd left her chained under a wagon to die, about a slaver named Harrow who marked human beings like cattle. And he made a decision. The men who had done this to Elenna Rae would not see another sunrise, not if he had anything to say about it. It wasn't about revenge. The Numanu didn't believe in revenge the way white men did. It was about balance, about justice, about ensuring that monsters who preyed on the helpless were removed from the world before they could create more victims. He would help Elenna heal as much as anyone could heal from such wounds. And then he would help her hunt. Because he had a feeling, call it warrior's instinct, call it recognition of a kindred spirit, that beneath all that pain and trauma, Elenna Rae was not a victim waiting to be saved. She was a weapon waiting to be forged. And Takakota knew something about making weapons from broken things. He'd spent his whole life doing exactly that, taking the shattered pieces of his people and teaching them to fight back, to survive, to refuse to die the way their enemies expected. He could do the same for her if she wanted it. The fire burned low and Takakota added more wood. Outside the cave, the desert sang its nighttime song, coyotes calling to each other, the wind moving through stone, the ancient rhythm of a land that had witnessed countless stories of suffering and survival. This was just one more. But something told him this story wasn't finished yet. It was only beginning. The first 3 days passed in a haze of fever and silence. Elenna slept more than she was awake, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion now that it felt safe enough to do so. Takakota kept the fire burning, changed her bandages twice daily, and made sure she drank water even when she protested that her stomach couldn't hold it. He didn't push her to talk. Words would come when they were ready, or they wouldn't come at all. Either way, his presence remained constant, a silent guardian who asked for nothing in return. On the 4th morning he woke to find her sitting up, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring at the cave entrance where dawn light was beginning to creep in. Her hair hung loose around her face, still matted in places, but some of the hollow desperation had left her eyes. "You're still here," she said without turning to look at him. "Where else would I be? Gone. Most people would have left by now, done their good deed, and moved on." She paused. "Or worse." Takakota sat up and began stoking the fire back to life. "I'm not most people." "No," she agreed quietly, "you're not." He made a simple breakfast of cornmeal cakes and weak tea brewed from sage leaves. She ate slowly, as if relearning the mechanics of it, and this time she kept it all down. Progress, he thought, small but real. When they finished eating, Elenna looked at him directly for the first time since he'd found her. "Why did you really save me? And don't tell me it's because you don't walk away from survivors. There's more to it than that." Takakota considered lying or deflecting, but something in her gaze demanded honesty. She'd been lied to enough for one lifetime. "I had a sister," he said finally, "Ayasha. She was taken by Texas Rangers when she was 15. They said they were moving her to a reservation that she'd be educated, civilized." He spat the last word like poison. "6 months later, I found her body in a ravine. She'd been used by the soldiers at the fort, passed around like—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "Like property. When they were done with her, they threw her away." Elenna's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or kinship. "I buried her on a hilltop where she could see the sunrise," he continued, "and I made a promise to her spirit that I would never again walk past someone in chains. that I would never let another person suffer what she suffered, not if I had the power to stop it. Did you kill them? Elenna asked. The soldiers. Yes. Good. The word hung between them, simple and final. No moral equivocation, no hand-wringing about justice versus revenge, just acknowledgement that some acts demanded a reckoning. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own memories of loss. Then Elenna took a shaky breath and began to speak. My father owned a ranch in the hill country. Nothing fancy, just cattle and horses, and enough land to make a living. My mother died when I was young, so it was always just the two of us. He taught me to ride, to rope, to shoot. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I was a better shot than most of the ranch hands. That used to make him so proud. What happened? Takakota asked gently. Men came one night, 6 of them. They wanted, the land said they were buying up properties for the railroad. My father refused to sell. He'd been born on that land, and he planned to die on it. Her voice went flat. He got his wish. Takakota waited, letting her tell it at her own pace. They shot him in front of me, made me watch. Then they set fire to the house and took me with them. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. I thought they were going to kill me too. I even hoped for it. But death would have been merciful, and these weren't but merciful men. They sold you to a man named Harrow, Jacob Harrow. He ran. She corrected herself as if uncertain of tenses, of whether her past was truly past. He runs a trading operation, that's what he calls it. Trading, like we're goods instead of people. The brand, Takakota said. Elenna's hand instinctively went to her shoulder blade, though she couldn't reach the mark through the blanket. He brands everyone he owns. Says it's for inventory purposes like marking cattle. H for Harrow, inside a circle. The circle means there's no escape. You belong to him forever. Where is he now? I don't know. His operation moves around. He has connections everywhere, lawmen, judges, railroad men, people who look the other way because he pays them to. She laughed bitterly. Or because they're customers. How long were you with him? 2 years, maybe closer to 3. Time stops meaning much when every day is the same nightmare. She stared into the fire, her eyes distant. He kept me in a cellar most of the time. Stone walls, dirt floor, darkness so complete you forget what light looks like. He'd bring me out when he had clients who wanted to look at the merchandise before buying. Takakota's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice steady. And the wagon, how did you end up there? I got sick. Some kind of fever. For weeks, I couldn't keep food down, couldn't work. She said, work, the way other people might say torture. Harrow doesn't keep sick merchandise. Bad for business. So he told his men to dump me somewhere remote. Said the desert would finish what the fever started. But you survived. I survived, she repeated, though she didn't sound particularly happy about it. And now I'm here in a cave with a stranger who says he wants to help me. Forgive me if I'm having trouble believing in happy endings. I'm not offering a happy ending, Takakota replied. I'm offering a choice. What choice? You can stay here, heal, and then go wherever you want. I'll give you supplies, point you toward the nearest settlement. You can start over, build a new life far from here. He paused. Or you can do something else. Elenna turned to look at him, and for the first time since he'd found her, there was a spark of something other than pain in her eyes. What else? You can learn to fight, to track, to hunt the men who did this to you. His voice was quiet but intense. You said there were 6 men who killed your father and sold you. I'm guessing they're all still alive, and Harrow certainly is. You're talking about revenge. I'm talking about justice. About making sure they can't do this to anyone else. But yes, if you want to call it revenge, call it that. He met her gaze without flinching. The question is, what do you want? Elenna was quiet for so long that Takakota thought she might not answer. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I want them dead, all of them, but especially Harrow. The words came faster now, heated by a rage that had been banked but never extinguished. I want him to know what it feels like to be helpless, to be nothing, to have your humanity stripped away piece by piece until you're not sure there's anything left worth saving. Then I'll teach you. Why would you do this for me? Takakota thought of Ayasha, of the promise he'd made on that hilltop. Because some debts can only be paid forward. Because I couldn't save my sister, but maybe I can help you save yourself. He stood and offered her his hand. So what do you say, Elenna Rae? Do you want to learn how to be a weapon? She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and took it. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were fierce. Teach me, she said. The training began that very afternoon. Takakota started with the basics, how to stand, how to move, how to use her center of gravity to her advantage. Elenna's body was weak from malnutrition and abuse, but beneath the damage he could sense the ranch girl, who'd once been stronger than the hired hands. That person was still in there buried, but not dead. Fighting isn't about strength, he told her, as he demonstrated a basic defensive stance. It's about balance, leverage, and knowing how to exploit your opponent's weaknesses. A smaller person can defeat a larger one if they're smarter and faster. I'm not fast right now, Elenna said, trying to mirror his stance and immediately wobbling. You will be. But first, you need to rebuild your body. We'll start slowly. Slowly turned out to be excruciating. Every muscle in Elenna's body screamed in protest as she attempted even the simplest movements. Years of abuse had left her weak and uncoordinated, her reflexes dulled by trauma. More than once she collapsed in frustration, tears streaming down her face. I can't do this, she gasped after her legs gave out for the third time that day. I'm too broken. You're not broken, Takakota corrected, helping her back to her feet. You're healing. There's a difference. Broken things stay broken. Healing things hurt before they get better. It hurts too much. Good. Pain means you're still alive. Pain means you're fighting. The day you stop feeling pain is the day you should worry. He positioned her hands, again adjusting her stance. One more time, show me the strike I taught you. Gritting her teeth, Elenna attempted the movement again. This time, her balance held. Better, Takakota said, and the approval in his voice made something warm bloom in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had praised her for anything other than submission. The days developed a rhythm. Mornings were for physical training, rebuilding strength, learning to move efficiently, practicing strikes and blocks until they became muscle memory. Afternoons, after the desert heat became too intense, they would rest in the cave. Takakota taught her to identify edible plants, to read tracks in the sand, to understand the language of the wind and sky. Evenings were for weapons training. He started her with a knife, teaching her how to grip it, how to slash and stab, how to defend against someone larger and stronger. The blade felt foreign in her hand at first, but gradually it became an extension of her arm. The knife is honest, Takakota explained as she practiced on a makeshift target he'd set up. It doesn't lie or deceive. It does exactly what you tell it to do. If you're committed, it will serve you. If you hesitate, it will betray you. I won't hesitate, Elenna promised, driving the blade into the target with more force than she'd managed before. I believe you. Nights were when the nightmares came. Despite Takakota's promise to wake her, Elenna often found herself trapped in dreams of the seller of Harrow's voice, of hands that grabbed and hurt and claimed. She would wake gasping, sometimes screaming, her body drenched in sweat and her heart hammering against her ribs. And every time Takakota would be there. He never touched her unless she reached for him first, never offered empty platitudes about everything being all right. He would simply sit nearby, his presence solid and real, a reminder that she was no longer in that place, that she was free. One night, about 2 weeks into her training, Elenna woke from a particularly vivid nightmare to find herself shaking uncontrollably. Takakota was already awake, tending the fire. "I dreamed I was back there," she whispered. "In the cellar. And I couldn't move, couldn't fight. I was just frozen." "That's normal," he said quietly. "The mind takes longer to heal than the body. The nightmares will fade, but it takes time. What if they don't? What if I'm broken forever?" Takakota looked at her across the firelight, his expression serious. "Do you know why some trees survive storms while others break? It's not because they're stronger, it's because they've learned to bend without breaking, to weather the wind rather than resist it. You survived things that should have killed you, Elenna. That didn't make you weak. It made you flexible, resilient." "I don't feel resilient." "Because you're still healing, but watch." He pulled up his sleeve to reveal a long, jagged scar running from his wrist to his elbow. "This is from when I was 12. A buffalo gored me during a hunt. I nearly died from infection. For months I couldn't use this arm. I thought I'd never be a warrior, never be able to provide for my family." "But you healed." "I healed. And now this arm is stronger than the other because I had to work twice as hard with it." He let the sleeve fall back down. "Your scars, the ones on your body and the ones in your mind, they don't have to define you. They can be proof that you survived, that you endured." Elenna was quiet for a moment, processing his words. Then she said, "Show me the scar on your arm again, the one you mentioned that first night, the one from your sister." Takakota hesitated, then pulled up his other sleeve. There on his bicep was a small mark, a traditional Comanche tattoo in the shape of a star. "It's not a scar," Elenna observed. "No, it's better than a scar. This is a death mark. In my culture, when someone close to you dies, you can choose to carry their symbol on your body. Ayasha loved the stars. She used to say they were the spirits of warriors watching over us." His voice grew thick. "So I carry her star. That way she's always with me." Without thinking, Elenna reached out and touched the mark gently. Takakota went very still, but he didn't pull away. "She'd be proud of you," Elenna said softly, "for keeping your promise to her. Maybe, or maybe she'd tell me I'm a fool for risking my life for strangers." He smiled faintly. "She was always more practical than me." "I'm glad you're a fool then." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, it was too soon for that, maybe too soon forever, but understanding, recognition. Two people who'd been broken by the world and were learning to rebuild themselves from the wreckage. Takakota cleared his throat and pulled his sleeve back down. "You should try to sleep again. Tomorrow's training will be harder." "How much harder can it get?" "Tomorrow I teach you to track a moving target, then to fight with your hands bound." At her incredulous expression, he added, "If you're ever captured again, I won't be. But if you are, you need to know how to escape even when you're restrained. It's not enough to fight when you're free. You need to learn to fight when everything is stacked against you." Elenna nodded slowly. The logic was sound, even if the thought of being bound again made her skin crawl. "All right, teach me that too." "I will, but first, sleep." This time, when she closed her eyes, the nightmares were less vivid. And when she woke in the gray light before dawn, she found herself reaching for the knife Takakota had given her, her fingers curling around the handle with a certainty that hadn't been there before. She was getting stronger, not just physically, but mentally. The fog that had clouded her thoughts for so long was beginning to lift, replaced by clarity and purpose. 3 weeks into her training, Elenna asked Takakota to teach her to shoot. He was reluctant at first. Gunshots could attract attention, and ammunition was precious, but she insisted. "My father taught me," she explained. "Before everything happened, I was the best shot on our ranch. I need to remember that part of myself, the part that was strong before they tried to destroy me." So Takakota produced an old rifle he'd been carrying along with a handful of cartridges, and they walked far from the cave to a canyon where the rock walls would muffle the sound. He set up targets, pieces of wood balanced on rocks at varying distances, and handed her the rifle. "Show me what you remember." Elenna took the weapon, feeling its familiar weight settle into her hands. For a moment she was 14 again, standing beside her father as he taught her to sight down the barrel, to control her breathing, to squeeze rather than pull the trigger. She aimed at the farthest target, a piece of driftwood about 100 yards away, breathed in, breathed out halfway, and fired. The wood exploded into splinters. Takakota's eyebrows rose. "You weren't exaggerating." A slow smile spread across Elenna's face, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Told you I was good." She proceeded to hit every target he'd set up, each shot more confident than the last. With each pull of the trigger, she felt more of herself returning. The ranch girl who'd been buried under years of trauma was clawing her way back to the surface. When the ammunition was gone, they walked back to the cave in comfortable silence. But as they approached, Elenna stopped suddenly. "There were 6 of them," she said. "What? The men who killed my father and sold me to Harrow. I know their names. I know what they look like." She turned to face him, and her eyes held a determination that was almost frightening. "I want to find them. I want to make them answer for what they did." Takakota studied her carefully. "You're not ready yet." "When will I be ready?" "When you can beat me in a fight." Elenna laughed incredulously. "You're twice my size and have been training since childhood. That's not a fair standard." "Life isn't fair. Combat isn't fair. If you're going to hunt dangerous men, you need to be better than fair. You need to be exceptional." He crossed his arms. "So that's the test. Beat me in hand-to-hand combat, and I'll help you track down everyone on your list." "Fine." Elenna set a spark of competitive fire lighting in her eyes. "Then teach me how to beat you." Over the next month, the training intensified. Takakota pushed her harder than ever, demanding perfection in every movement, every strike, every defensive maneuver. He taught her dirty fighting, how to use sand and stones as weapons, how to exploit every advantage, how to fight without honor, because her opponents certainly wouldn't have any. He taught her patience, too, how to wait for the perfect moment to strike, how to study an opponent's patterns and exploit their habits, how to turn their strength against them. And slowly, painfully, Elenna transformed. The gaunt, broken woman he'd found under that wagon was gone, replaced by someone harder, sharper, more dangerous. She moved with purpose now, with confidence. Her body was lean and strong, her reflexes honed by hours of practice. But it was her eyes that changed the most. The emptiness was gone, replaced by a cold, focused determination that Takakota recognized because he saw it in his own reflection. She'd stopped being a victim. Now she was becoming a hunter. One evening, as they sat by the fire after training, Elenna asked, "Do you think I'm ready?" "Almost." "How can you tell?" "Because you're starting to scare me a little." He said it lightly, but there was truth underneath. The woman sitting across from him was nothing like the one he'd rescued. That woman had been desperate to die. This one was desperate to live and to make others pay for what they'd taken from her. Elenna smiled grimly. "Good, they should be scared." "They will be, but Elenna," he waited until she looked at him. "When we do this, when we hunt these men, there's no going back. You'll have to live with what you do. Can you handle that?" "I've been living with what they did to me. I think I can live with evening the scales." She paused. "But I need to know, will you really help me, or will you try to talk me out of it when the time comes?" "I'll help you," Takakota promised. "I told you that the day you took my hand. I keep my promises. Even if it means killing. Especially then." They sat in silence for a while, both contemplating the path ahead. Then Elenna did something unexpected. She reached across the fire and took his hand. Not for support this time, but as an equal, as a partner. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up on me, for seeing something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." Takakota squeezed her hand gently. "You don't need to thank me, just promise me one thing." "What?" "When this is over, when we've done what needs to be done, promise me you'll find a way to live. Really live, not just survive. Because that's the final victory over men like Harrow. Not killing them, but refusing to let them kill the part of you that's still capable of joy." Elenna's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I don't know if that part still exists. It does. I've seen glimpses of it. The woman who smiled when she hit that target. The one who makes jokes when she's exhausted. She's still in there, Elenna. Don't let them take her from you, too. I'll try, she whispered. That's all anyone can do. They released each other's hands, but something had shifted between them. They weren't just allies anymore, or teacher and student. They were bound together by shared pain and shared purpose. Two souls who understood what it meant to survive the unsurvivable. And as the fire burned low and the stars emerged overhead, Elenna made a silent vow. She would learn everything Takakota could teach her. She would become strong enough, fast enough, deadly enough to face the men who'd destroyed her life. And then one by one she would make them pay. But first, she had to beat Takakota in a fight. That challenge would take 6 more weeks of brutal training, but when the day finally came, when she managed to pin him in the dust with a knife at his throat, he looked up at her with something like pride. Now you're ready, he said, and Elenna knew he was right. They broke camp the next morning, leaving behind the cave that had been both sanctuary and training ground for nearly 3 months. Elenna took one last look at the stone chamber where she'd been reborn, then turned her back on it without ceremony. The past was the past. What mattered now was the future she was about to carve with her own hands. Takakota had given her proper clothing, buckskin pants, and a shirt he'd traded for at a distant settlement, along with sturdy boots that fit well enough. She'd bound her hair back in a tight braid, and the knife he'd trained her with now hung at her hip like it belonged there, which it did. Tell me about the first one, Takakota said as they rode south on horses he'd kept hidden in a canyon nearby. The first name on your list? Elenna's jaw tightened. Marlowe, Jack Marlowe. He was the one who actually pulled the trigger on my father, shot him twice in the chest while laughing about it. Her hands clenched on the reins. He had a scar across his left cheek. Got it in a bar fight or so, he bragged. Said it made him look dangerous. Where would he be now? Last I heard, he was working as muscle at a roadhouse about 2 days' ride from here, place called the Dusty Rose. It's a trading post, saloon and brothel all rolled into one. Men like Marlowe gravitate toward places like that. Plenty of work for someone who doesn't mind breaking bones for money. And you're sure he'll remember you? A cold smile touched Elenna's lips. Oh, he'll remember. I made sure of that the last time I saw him. Spat in his face when he delivered me to Harrow. He broke 2 of my ribs for it, but it was worth it, to see the rage and in his eyes. Takakota glanced at her, noting the way she sat straighter in the saddle now, the way her eyes scanned the horizon, with purpose rather than fear. When we get there, you'll need to be smart about this. Walking in and killing him outright will just get you arrested or shot. I know. That's why I have a plan. Which is, I walk in alone. Let him see me. Let him think I'm still broken, still afraid. Her voice was steady, almost detached. Men like Marlowe, they get off on power, on fear. If he thinks I'm there to beg, to plead, he'll let his guard down. That's when I strike. And if he doesn't let his guard down, then I adapt. You taught me that always have a backup plan and be ready to improvise. She looked at him. You'll be there, won't you? In case things go wrong. I'll be there, Takakota confirmed. But Elenna, this is important. You need to be the one to do it. Not because I'm testing you, but because you need to know you can, that you're not helpless anymore. I know I'm not helpless. I pinned you in the dirt. Remember? In training. This is different. This is looking into the eyes of someone who hurt you and choosing to end their life. Some people can't do it when the moment comes. Their hands shake or they hesitate, and that hesitation can be fatal. Elenna was quiet for a moment, then said, I won't hesitate. When I close my eyes, I can still see my father's face as he died, can still hear the sound of that gunshot. Marlowe took everything from me. He doesn't get to keep breathing while my father rots in the ground. The conviction in her voice left no room for doubt. They traveled for 2 days through increasingly settled territory. The wild prairie gradually gave way to farms and ranches, to roads rutted by wagon wheels and towns that smelled of civilization, horses, sweat smoke, and commerce. Elenna felt exposed here, vulnerable in a way she hadn't in the desert. Every man they passed could be someone who'd hurt her, could be one of Harrow's associates, could recognize her and sound the alarm, but no one looked at her twice. The gaunt, terrified slave girl was gone. In her place was a hard-eyed woman who rode like she owned the world, and people instinctively gave her space. The dusty rose came into view just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was exactly as Elenna remembered, a ramshackle two-story building with a covered porch where men lounged and smoked, watching travelers pass with calculating eyes. Music drifted from inside, badly played piano mixed with raucous laughter. "That's it," Elenna said, her voice tight. Takakota studied the building. "How do you want to do this? I go in at dusk when the place is busy but not packed. You come in 5 minutes later, take a seat near the bar where you can see everything. If Marlowe's there, he'll be the one with the scar, probably playing cards or drinking. Let me approach him first. And if he tries to hurt you before you can make your move, then you stop him, but only if I'm actually in danger of dying. Anything less, I handle myself." She dismounted and began checking her weapons, the knife at her hip, another smaller blade hidden in her boot, and the derringer Takakota had acquired for her tucked into a holster at the small of her back. "How do I look?" "Dangerous." "Good." They waited in the shadow of a nearby building until the light began to fade. Elenna's heart was hammering against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She'd trained for this, prepared for this, and more importantly, she'd survived worse than whatever might wait for her inside that saloon. "Elenna," Takakota said as she prepared to leave, "remember, you're not the person you were when Marlowe last saw you. You're stronger now, better. Don't let him make you forget that." "I won't." She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the dusty rose. The interior was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies, cheap whiskey, and desperation. Men clustered around tables playing cards or dice, while women in garish dresses moved between them like colorful fish in a murky pond. No one paid Elenna much attention as she entered, just another drifter looking for a drink or a bed. She scanned the room methodically the way Takakota had taught her. Northeast corner, 3 men playing poker. Bar along the west wall, bartender polishing glasses. Stairs leading up to the rooms where the real business happened. And there, at a table near the back, her breath caught. Jack Marlowe sat with his chair tilted back against the wall, a bottle of whiskey in front of him and a satisfied smirk on his face. The scar was still there, running from his left eye to his jaw like a brand. He was heavier than she remembered, his gut straining against his shirt, but his arms were still thick with muscle. He was laughing at something one of his companions had said, his head thrown back, completely at ease, completely unaware that death had just walked through the door. Elenna made herself move casually toward the bar, ordered a whiskey she had no intention of drinking, and positioned herself so she could watch Marlowe without being obvious about it. Her mind was racing, calculating angles and exits, running through scenarios the way she'd practiced 1,000 times in the cave. Takakota entered exactly 5 minutes later, his presence commanding immediate attention. A Comanche warrior walking into a white man's saloon was noteworthy enough that conversations paused, eyes tracked his movement. But he ignored them all, taking a seat at the bar with his back to the wall and his hand never far from his weapon. Marlowe had noticed the disturbance, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the newcomer, but his gaze slid right past Elenna. He didn't recognize her. Why would he? The broken girl he'd sold to Harrow was dead. This woman was someone else entirely. Elenna finished her whiskey, or rather poured most of it onto the floor when no one was looking, and stood. Her legs felt distant, like they belonged to someone else, but they carried her steadily across the room toward Marlowe's table. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he had to look up from his cards. "Jack Marlowe," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for him to hear over the noise. He frowned, annoyed at the interruption. Yeah, what do you want? I want you to remember me. Something flickered in his eyes, then confusion, then a dawning recognition that turned his expression from annoyed to shocked. You, his voice was a hoarse whisper, you're supposed to be dead. Disappointed, Elenna asked, and before he could respond, before his companions could even register what was happening, she drove her knife up under his ribs, with all the force Takakota had taught her to channel through her core. Marlowe's eyes went wide. His mouth opened, but only blood came out. This is for my father, Elenna whispered close enough that only he could hear. Then she twisted the blade, feeling it scrape against bone, and pulled it free. Marlowe slumped forward onto the table, his cards, scattering red, spreading across the wood like spilled wine. For a moment the entire saloon was frozen in tableau. Then chaos erupted. Marlowe's companions lunged for her, but Elenna was already moving. She'd mapped every exit, every obstacle, every potential threat. She sidestepped the first man's grab, used his momentum to send him crashing into a table. The second man she caught with a vicious kick to the knee, another technique from Takakota that dropped him howling to the floor. Then Takakota was there, his presence creating a barrier between her and anyone else who might have ideas about revenge or justice. She's with me, he said quietly, but his hand was on his knife and his eyes promised violence to anyone foolish enough to press the issue. The bartender wisely ducked behind his counter. The other patrons suddenly found their drinks fascinating. Violence in the Dusty Rose wasn't uncommon, and most people knew better than to get involved in someone else's blood feud. Elenna walked toward the door, her movements controlled despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. She didn't run, didn't hurry, just walked like she had every right to kill a man and leave him bleeding on a saloon floor, because she did have that right. Marlowe had murdered her father, had destroyed her life, and now he'd paid for it. That was justice, simple and clean. They were on their horses and riding hard before anyone thought to raise an alarm. By the time the local law arrived at the Dusty Rose, if they bothered to come at all, Elenna and Takakota would be miles away, ghosts in the darkness. They rode until the saloon lights were just distant pinpricks, then slowed to a sustainable pace. Elenna's hands were shaking now, the post-combat reaction finally catching up to her. She pulled her horse to a stop and dismounted her legs, barely holding her weight. I killed him, she said, her voice strange in her own ears. I looked him in the eyes, and I killed him. Yes, Takakota confirmed, dismounting beside her. I thought I'd feel different, triumphant or satisfied or something, but I just feel... She trailed off, searching for the word. Empty, Takakota suggested. No, not empty, lighter maybe, like I've been carrying this weight for so long that I forgot it was there, and now suddenly it's gone. She looked down at her hands, still stained with Marlowe's blood. Is that wrong? Should I feel guilty? Do you feel guilty? Elenna considered the question honestly. No, he deserved what he got. The world is better without him in it. Then there's your answer. Takakota handed her a canteen, and she drank, washing away the taste of smoke and violence. The first kill is always the hardest. Your body rebels against it, even when your mind knows it's necessary, but you didn't hesitate when it mattered. That's what counts. 5 more, Elenna said mostly to herself. 5 more names on the list. We'll find them one at a time. They made camp a few miles further on in a grove of cottonwoods near a creek. Elenna washed the blood from her hands and knife, watching it swirl away in the current. Such a small thing, blood. It looked almost black in the moonlight, anonymous, like it could have come from anyone, but it hadn't. It had come from Jack Marlowe, and now he would never hurt anyone again. Takakota built a small fire and made coffee, strong and bitter. They sat on opposite sides of the flames, each lost in their own thoughts. Tell me about the next one, Takakota said eventually. Elenna wrapped her hands around her tin cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Cole Bradford. He was the brains of the operation, if you can call it that. He's the one who identified ranches that were vulnerable, who planned the raids. Without him, the others would have just been common thugs. Where is he? That's the problem. Bradford's smart and he's connected. Last I knew, he was working for the railroad using his position to scout land they wanted to acquire. Legal on the surface, but underneath, it's the same game: intimidation, violence, theft. Railroad men have protection. Going after him will be harder. I know, but he's not invincible. Everyone has vulnerabilities. She stared into the fire. Bradford's weakness is pride. He likes people to know how clever he is, how he's always 3 steps ahead. That arrogance will be his downfall. We'll need to plan carefully. We will, but not tonight. Elenna drained her coffee and set the cup aside. Tonight, I just want to sit here and remember that I'm not helpless anymore. That I'm not the girl who begged for mercy and didn't receive it. Tonight, I want to remember that I'm strong. You are strong, Takakota said quietly. Stronger than you know. They fell into comfortable silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, and another answered. The sound was lonely but not sad, just the natural rhythm of predators hunting in the darkness, which Elenna supposed was exactly what she'd become. The next morning, they rode west, following leads. Takakota had gathered through his network of contacts. Bradford was reportedly working on a railroad expansion near a town called Redemption, a name Elenna found grimly appropriate. It took them 4 days of hard riding to reach it. Redemption was bigger than the settlement that housed the Dusty Rose, with actual streets and buildings that looked permanent. The railroad had brought money and people, and with them came the usual mix of opportunity and corruption. They took rooms at a boarding house run by a widow who asked no questions as long as they paid in advance. From there, Elenna began her reconnaissance. Bradford wasn't hard to find. He held court at the railroad office during business hours, and in the evening he could be found at the nicest hotel in town, dining with local officials and landowners. He wore expensive suits now and had grown a mustache that he probably thought made him look distinguished. Elenna watched him from across the street, rage simmering in her gut. This man had condemned her father to death, had mapped out the destruction of their lives with the same casual efficiency he now brought to railroad expansion, and he lived in comfort and respectability while her father rotted in an unmarked grave. I can't just walk up and stab him like I did Marlowe, she told Takakota that night as they planned. He's too visible, too protected. We need a different approach. Agreed. So what do you propose? Elenna was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then a slow smile spread across her face. You said Bradford's weakness is pride, that he likes to show off how clever he is. Yes. Then we give him a puzzle he can't resist solving. We make him come to us. She laid out her plan, and Takakota listened with growing approval. It was risky, required precise timing, and depended on Bradford behaving exactly as Elenna predicted. But it was also brilliant in its simplicity. You've learned well, he said when she finished. I had a good teacher. They spent the next 3 days setting the stage. Elenna spread rumors in the right places, whispers about a land deed that had gone missing, one that could invalidate several of the railroad's recent acquisitions. She made sure those rumors reached Bradford's ears through intermediaries, each one adding details that would intrigue a man who prided himself on solving problems. Then she waited. On the 4th night, a messenger arrived at the boarding house with a note requesting Elenna's presence at a meeting. The location was an abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. The time was midnight. He took the bait, Elenna said, reading the note. You're sure it's him and not a trap set by someone else? The phrasing is distinctly Bradford's. He always was condescending, even when he was threatening people. She tucked the note away. This is it. Takakota checked his weapons. I'll be in position an hour early. If anything feels wrong, if he brings more men than expected, we abort. Agreed. At 11:30, Elenna made her way through the darkened streets toward the warehouse. She'd dressed in the same buckskin clothing she'd worn when she killed Marlowe, her knives concealed, but easily accessible. The Derringer was loaded and ready. The warehouse loomed against the night sky, all shadows and sharp angles. She could see lamplight through one of the windows. Bradford was already there, probably thinking he was setting a trap for some foolish person who claimed to have information he needed. He had no idea he was the one walking into a trap. Elenna pushed open the door and stepped inside. The space was vast and empty, their footsteps echoing off the high ceiling. Bradford stood near a table with a lantern, and just as she'd predicted, he'd brought only one other man with him, a bodyguard type who looked competent but not exceptional. "You have something I want," Bradford called out, his voice carrying across the empty space. "Or so I've been told." "Do I?" Elenna moved closer, staying in the shadows. "And what makes you think I'd give it to you? Because I'm prepared to pay handsomely, and because refusing me would be unwise." He tried to see her face, squinting into the darkness. "Step into the light. Let's conduct business like civilized people." Elenna laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "Civilized, that's rich, coming from you." Something in her voice made Bradford tense. "Do I know you? You should. You planned the raid that killed my father. You sold me to Jacob Harrow like I was livestock." She stepped into the light, letting him see her clearly for the first time. "My name is Elenna Rae, and you destroyed my life." Bradford's face went pale, then red with recognition and rage. "You're supposed to be dead," Harrow said. "Harrow was wrong. And so were you, thinking you could do what you did and face no consequences." Her hand moved to her knife. "Tonight, you pay for my father's blood." "Kill her," Bradford snapped at his bodyguard. The man drew his pistol, but before he could aim, an arrow sprouted from his shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the ground hard, screaming, and Takakota emerged from the shadows with another arrow already knocked. "Just the two of us now," Elenna said to Bradford, "the way it should be." Bradford backed away, his hand fumbling for his own weapon, but Elenna was faster. She closed the distance between them in 3 strides and knocked the gun from his hand. It skittered away across the wooden floor, disappearing into darkness. "Please," Bradford said, and the word was so pathetic, so familiar that it almost made Elenna laugh. "Please, I have money, influence. I can give you anything you want." "I want my father back. Can you give me that?" "I know, but then you have nothing I need." She pressed her knife against his throat just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Do you remember him? My father, Thomas Rae. He was the man you had murdered so you could steal his land." "It was business," Bradford gasped. "Nothing personal. The railroad needed. It was personal to me. He was my father. He taught me to ride, to shoot, to be strong. And you took him from me. You took everything from me." Her voice was cold, controlled. "But I'm taking it back now, starting with your life." Bradford's eyes widened with the sudden certain knowledge that he was about to die. "Wait." Elenna didn't wait. She drew the blade across his throat in one swift motion, stepping back as blood poured down his expensive suit. He clutched at his neck, making horrible gurgling sounds, and then he fell. It was over in seconds. Elenna stood over Bradford's body, watching the life drain out of him the same way he'd watched her father die. She felt nothing, no satisfaction, no remorse, just a cold acknowledgement that this was justice, that the scales had been balanced slightly. Takakota appeared at her side. "We need to go. Someone might have heard." "Let them hear," Elenna said, but she was already moving toward the door. "Let them all know that Jack Marlowe and Cole Bradford are dead, and that someone's hunting the men who thought they were untouchable." They vanished into the night, leaving 2 bodies behind and nothing else. No witnesses, no evidence, just the message written in blood. Some debts can only be paid one way. They rode hard through the night, putting distance between themselves and redemption before the bodies were discovered. By dawn, they were 20 miles out, camped in a ravine where the rock walls would hide their fire from prying eyes. Elenna sat cleaning her knife with methodical precision, the same way Takakota had taught her months ago. The blood came off easily enough, it always did, but she found herself scrubbing longer than necessary, as if she could erase the memory of Bradford's final moments along with the stains. 4 more, she said quietly. Takakota looked up from where he was tending the horses. Are you keeping count to motivate yourself or to remind yourself when it will end? Both, maybe, neither. She sheathed the knife and stared at her hands. They looked the same as they always had, but they'd taken 2 lives now. Would they look different after 4 more? After 6? How many men have you killed? I stopped counting years ago. Dozens, probably. Maybe more. He sat down across from her. Why do you ask? Does it get easier? The killing. Takakota was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. The act itself becomes easier. Your hands stop shaking, your aim improves, you learn to distance yourself from the moment. But whether it gets easier on your soul, that's different for everyone. Some men become numb to it, others let it consume them until violence is all they know. Which are you? Neither, I hope. I kill when necessary to protect my people or to balance the scales of justice. But I don't enjoy it. I don't seek it out. His dark eyes met hers. The day I start enjoying it is the day I've lost myself. Elenna nodded slowly. I didn't enjoy it. Watching Bradford die, watching Marlowe bleed out, it didn't make me happy. It just made me feel less burdened, like I could breathe a little easier. That's natural. You're not seeking pleasure from their deaths. You're seeking closure, peace. That's different. Is it because sometimes I worry that I'm becoming the very thing I'm hunting, a killer without conscience? Takakota leaned forward, his expression serious. A killer without conscience wouldn't be asking these questions, wouldn't care if she was becoming a monster. The fact that you're examining your own soul means you haven't lost it yet. Yet, Elenna repeated. That's not exactly reassuring. It's honest, and honesty is all I can offer you. He paused. If you want to stop, we can. You've had your revenge on 2 of them. That might be enough. Elenna shook her head firmly. No, I need to finish this. All 6 of them, and Harrow. Stopping now would mean the others get away with what they did, and I can't live with that. She looked at him. Can you understand that? Better than you know. I hunted the men who killed my sister for 3 years, tracked them across territories through towns and wilderness, and when I finally found them, he stopped, something dark crossing his face. I understand the need to see it through, to know that justice was served, even if you have to serve it yourself. They sat in silence after that, each lost in memories of the dead and the debts that still needed paying. The sun climbed higher, warming the ravine, but Elenna felt cold inside. 2 down, 4 to go. The numbers should have brought comfort, but instead they just reminded her how far she still had to travel down this bloody road. Tell me about the next one, Takakota said finally. Let's keep moving forward. Elenna pulled out a piece of leather she'd been carrying since the cave, the one with 6 names carved into it. She ran her finger over the 3rd name. Samuel Pierce. He was the youngest of them, maybe 22 or 23. He didn't plan the raid or pull the trigger, but he held me down while they tied me up. And he laughed the whole time. Where would he be? That's the problem. Pierce was always drifting, never staying in one place long. Last I heard, he'd joined up with a group of mercenaries working the border towns. Men who do dirty work for whoever pays best, claim jumping intimidation, worse. Mercenaries travel in groups. That makes him harder to isolate. I know, but I have an idea how to draw him out. Elenna's eyes were calculating. Men like Pierce have simple minds. They like money, drink, and women. If we can offer him something he can't resist, he'll separate from his pack. Over the next week, they tracked Pierce's movements through a network of informants and careful observation. He was working with a group of 5 other mercenaries, all of them cut from the same cloth, violent men who'd found a way to profit from other people's misery. They'd set up a temporary camp outside a border town called Santa Rosa, hiring themselves out to local ranchers who needed muscle to discourage homesteaders from claiming land. Elenna watched them from a distance, noting their patterns, their habits. Pierce was exactly as she remembered, loud, crude, always the first to volunteer for the dirtiest work. He wore his violence like a badge of honor, bragging about men he'd beaten and women he'd taken. Watching him made Elenna's blood boil, but she kept her anger cold and controlled. Hot rage made you sloppy. Cold rage made you deadly. "There's a cantina they frequent," she told Takakota as they planned. "Every third night Pierce goes there alone. The others stay at camp, but he sneaks off to drink and gamble. His one weakness is cards. He's terrible at them, but thinks he's good. So we take him at the cantina. No, too public, too many witnesses, but we can use it as the starting point." Elenna's plan was simple but effective. "I go in first, sit at his table, let him think I'm just another woman looking for company. When he's drunk enough, I suggest we go somewhere private. He'll follow men like him always do." Takakota's jaw tightened. "I don't like putting you in that position. I've been in worse positions and survived. Besides, this is different. This time, I'm in control. This time, I'm the predator, not the prey." She met his eyes. "Trust me. I can do this." "I do trust you. It's him I don't trust. You'll be close by. If anything goes wrong, you'll know." They waited for the right night, the third one, when Pierce would make his usual trip to the cantina. Elenna prepared carefully, changing into a dress she'd acquired in town. It wasn't fancy, just a simple cotton thing, but it transformed her appearance. She let her hair down, softened, her expression became someone non-threatening. Looking at herself in the boarding house mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't the hardened hunter she'd become, or the broken slave she'd been. This was someone else entirely, a role she was playing, a mask she wore to get close enough to kill. "Remember," Takakota said as she prepared to leave, "if he recognizes you before you're ready, he won't. I'm not that person anymore. I don't even recognize myself sometimes." The cantina was exactly as grimy as she'd expected, full of rough men drinking rot-gut whiskey and playing cards with marked decks. Pierce sat at a corner table, already 3 drinks in, if his flushed face was any indication. He was losing badly to a couple of locals, cursing his luck between swigs from a bottle. Elenna approached casually, a drink in her hand, and paused by his table. "Mind if I watch? I'm trying to learn the game." Pierce looked up, his eyes immediately traveling over her body in a way that made her skin crawl. But she kept her expression neutral, even friendly, just a naive woman looking for company. "Sure, sweetheart," he slurred, gesturing to an empty chair. "Pull up a seat, maybe you'll bring me some luck." She sat watching the game and asking simple questions that made her seem interested but ignorant. Pierce preened under the attention, explaining the rules with exaggerated patience, clearly enjoying playing the expert. The other players rolled their eyes but said nothing. They were happy to keep taking his money. An hour passed, then 2. Pierce drank steadily, his movements becoming sloppier, his tongue looser. He started bragging about his work, about the men he'd intimidated, the violence he'd committed. Each story was worse than the last, and Elenna had to work to keep her expression admiring rather than disgusted. "You're so brave," she said, letting her hand rest on his arm. "All these dangerous men you've dealt with. Aren't you ever afraid?" "Afraid?" Pierce laughed. "I ain't afraid of nothing. You should have seen me back in the day. Me and my boys, we took what we wanted and didn't answer to nobody." He leaned closer, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Cleaned out a whole ranch once. The owner thought he could stand up to us, but we showed him different." Elenna's fingers tightened on his arm, but her voice stayed light. "That must have taken real courage." "Damn right it did. And there was this girl there, the owner's daughter, pretty little thing, all fire and spirit." His eyes glazed with the memory. "She fought like a wildcat when we tied her up. Took 3 of us to hold her down." It took every ounce of Elenna's self-control not to drive her hidden knife into his throat right there. Instead, she smiled and said, "You must have so many stories. Maybe you could tell me more somewhere quieter. All this noise makes it hard to hear." Pierce's grin was predatory. Now that's the best idea I've heard all night. There's a stable behind here, nice and private. What do you say? I'd like that. They stood Pierce wobbling slightly and made their way toward the back door. Elenna caught Takakota's eye as they passed. He was sitting at the bar nursing a drink, and he gave the slightest nod. He'd follow at a distance just in case. The stable was dark and smelled of horses and hay. Pierce pulled her inside, already fumbling with his belt, and Elenna let him back her against a stall. "You're a pretty one," he mumbled, his hands grabbing at her. "Gonna have some fun with you." "You know what's funny?" Elenna said conversationally, her hand moving to the knife hidden in her dress. "You just told me about that ranch you raided, about the girl who fought back." Pierce paused, some distant alarm bell ringing in his drunken brain. "What about it?" "I was that girl." Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by fear. He tried to pull away to reach for his gun, but Elenna was faster. She drove her knee into his groin with vicious force, and as he doubled over, she brought her blade up under his ribs. "You held me down," she hissed in his ear. "You laughed while they tied me up and sold me like livestock. You thought you were so brave, so powerful, but look at you now, dying in a stable like the animal you are." Pierce tried to speak, blood bubbling from his lips, but Elenna twisted the knife, and he collapsed. She stood over him, watching the light fade from his eyes, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. "3 down," she whispered. Takakota appeared in the doorway, having heard the commotion. He looked at Pierce's body, then at Elenna. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, better than fine." She cleaned her blade on Pierce's shirt. "Let's go. We have 3 more to find." They left Santa Rosa that night, and as they rode, Elenna felt something shifting inside her. With each name crossed off her list, she was becoming someone new. Not the broken girl she'd been, but not entirely the ranch daughter either. Something in between, something harder, colder, more dangerous. The 4th name was easier to find. Thomas Garrett had always been predictable, and age hadn't changed him. He was working as a foreman on a ranch north of the border, using his position to run a side business stealing cattle and horses. Elenna and Takakota spent 2 days watching his patterns before striking. They caught him alone one evening, checking fence lines far from the main house. He tried to fight, but Elenna had learned too much, become too skilled. The encounter was over in minutes. Garrett's body left for the coyotes to find. 4 down, 2 to go, plus Harrow. The 5th man, Luther Hayes, proved more challenging. He'd become paranoid over the years, surrounded himself with guards, moved frequently. It took 3 weeks of tracking before they finally cornered him in a mining camp. The fight was brutal. Hayes was a large man, skilled with his fists and knife, and he nearly killed Elenna before Takakota intervened with an arrow that took Hayes in the shoulder. Even wounded Hayes fought like a demon, but Elenna was relentless. When it was over, when Hayes lay dead in the dirt, she had new scars to add to her collection. A gash across her forearm, bruised ribs, a split lip. 5 down, she said, spitting blood. 1 more and then Harrow. But the 6th man, Robert Chen, had vanished. They searched for weeks, following cold trails and dead ends. He'd either gone underground or was already dead by someone else's hand. Either way, the trail had gone cold. "We may never find him," Takakota said one night as they made camp. "Are you willing to accept that?" Elenna stared into the fire, frustration warring with pragmatism. "I don't like it, but 5 out of 6 isn't bad." And Chen was always the follower, never the leader. He doesn't matter as much as Harrow. "Then we focus on Harrow." "Yes," her voice was hard. "He's the one who profited most from my suffering. He's the one who needs to die most of all." They began gathering intelligence on Harrow's operation, but what they discovered was disturbing. Harrow had grown more powerful in the years since Elenna's escape. His network of buyers, sellers, and enforcers stretched across 3 territories. He had judges in his pocket, marshals on his payroll, and enough money to buy his way out of almost any trouble. Taking him down wouldn't be simple. It would require careful planning, perfect execution, and probably more luck than Elenna was comfortable relying on. That's when they heard about Silas Crane. Crane was a former mercenary who'd worked for Harrow but had recently fallen out of favor. He was bitter, angry, and supposedly willing to sell information about Harrow's operation for the right price. It seemed too good to be true, which made Elenna suspicious, but they needed a way into Harrow's world, and Crane might be it. They arranged a meeting at a neutral location, an abandoned trading post halfway between territories. Crane was there when they arrived, a wiry man with intelligent eyes and a scar that ran from his ear to his collarbone. "You're the one hunting Harrow's men," he said to Elenna without preamble. "Word's gotten around about the bodies you've been leaving. Marlowe, Bradford, the others. Harrow's getting nervous." "Good," Elenna replied. "He should be. I can help you get to him. I know his routines, his safe houses, his weaknesses, but my information doesn't come cheap." "How much?" Crane named a figure that was substantial but not impossible. They negotiated, briefly settled on a price, and Crane began talking. He told them about Harrow's compound west of the Canyonlands, about the guards he employed, about the cellar where he kept his captives. Elenna's hands clenched at the mention of the cellar, but she kept her voice steady. "How many guards? Dozen, maybe more. All armed, all loyal. Harrow pays well and kills anyone who betrays him." Crane leaned forward. "But there's a shift change every evening at dusk. For about 15 minutes the compound is vulnerable. That's your window. And you know this how? Because I used to run security for him. I know every weakness in his operation." Crane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, that's also how I know this job is damn near suicide. Even with the information I'm giving you, your chances of success are slim." "I've survived worse odds," Elenna said. "Maybe, but there's one more thing you should know." Crane's expression grew serious. "Harrow knows you're coming. He's been expecting it since Marlowe died. He's got traps and plans in place. Walking into that compound might be the last thing you ever do." Takakota had been silent throughout the conversation, but now he spoke. "Why are you really helping us? What's your angle?" Crane was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Harrow killed my brother, said he was skimming profits, which maybe he was, but he was still my brother, and Harrow hung him from a tree like a piece of meat." His voice was bitter. "I can't take Harrow down myself. He's too protected, too powerful, but maybe you can, and if you can't, at least you'll hurt him before you die. Either way, I win." It was honest, at least. Elenna could respect that. They paid Crane his fee, collected the information, and prepared to leave. But as they mounted their horses, Crane called out, "One more thing. The cellar where he keeps the captives, it's got a rusted door that opens from the outside. If you want to free them, that's how you do it. But getting in might mean you can't get out." Elenna nodded her thanks, and they rode away, both of them processing what they'd learned. The mission had just become significantly more complex, but at least they had a plan. A dangerous, possibly fatal plan, but a plan nonetheless. They were 2 days from Harrow's compound when Elenna woke to find Takakota gone and 4 men standing over her with weapons drawn. She reached for her knife, but someone kicked it away. "Don't bother," a familiar voice said, and Silas Crane stepped into view. "I've already sold you out. Harrow's paying twice what you did for your location." Elenna's heart sank, even as rage flooded through her. She'd been betrayed. They'd walked right into a trap, blinded by their need for information. The men grabbed her, binding her hands behind her back with rough efficiency. She struggled, but there were too many of them, and Takakota was nowhere to be seen. Had they killed him? The thought sent ice through her veins. "Where is he?" she demanded. "Where's Takakota?" "The Indian dead, probably. We shot him when he went to get water. He went down hard." Crane grinned. "Nothing personal, you understand. Just business." They dragged her to a horse, threw her across the saddle, and began the journey to Harrow's compound. Elenna's mind raced, looking for options, for opportunities to escape. But with her hands bound and surrounded by armed men, her choices were limited. She'd come so far, survived so much, only to be captured again. The irony was cruel. But as they rode, as the miles passed beneath the horse's hooves, Elenna felt something crystallize inside her. Rage, yes. Fear, certainly. But also a cold, hard determination. She'd escaped Harrow once. She'd killed 5 of the 6 men who'd destroyed her life. She'd transformed herself from victim to hunter. And if Takakota was truly dead, if she was truly alone again, then she had nothing left to lose, which made her the most dangerous thing Harrow had ever encountered. They reached the compound as the sun began to set, and Crane hauled her down from the horse. "Harrow wants to see you personally. Lucky you." "Luck has nothing to do with it," Elenna replied, her voice cold. "I was coming for him anyway. This just speeds things up." Crane laughed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. Let's see how long it lasts, once Harrow gets his hands on you." They dragged her through the compound. She recognized it from Crane's description, could see the weaknesses he'd mentioned, and down into the cellar. The smell hit her immediately, blood, fear, and despair. It was exactly as she remembered, exactly as it had haunted her nightmares. But this time was different. This time she wasn't the broken girl who'd been sold here. She was a woman who'd learned to fight, to kill, to survive against impossible odds. And when they locked her in a cell, when they left her alone in the darkness, Elenna didn't despair. She waited, because she still had one knife they hadn't found, hidden in a seam of her boot, because she'd memorized the layout of this place from Crane's description, because she knew the shift change was coming, and with it, an opportunity, and because somewhere out there, she chose to believe that Takakota was still alive. He was too stubborn to die from a bullet, too skilled to go down without a fight. He'd taught her to never give up, to find strength even in the darkest moments. Now it was time to prove she'd learned that lesson well. The darkness of the cellar was absolute, the kind of black that pressed against your eyes and made you question whether they were even open. But Elenna had lived in this darkness before, had survived it, and she refused to let it consume her again. She worked methodically, feeling along the seam of her boot until her fingers found the small knife she'd hidden there. It was barely longer than her palm, meant for close work, but it was sharp, and it was hers. The guards had searched her, but not thoroughly enough. They'd assumed a bound woman was a helpless woman. They'd assumed wrong. The rope around her wrists was thick, but not impossible. She positioned the blade carefully, sawing at the fibers with patient precision. Rushing would only dull the edge or cause her to drop the knife, and she couldn't afford either mistake. Above her, she could hear footsteps, voices, the ordinary sounds of men who thought they were safe. They had no idea what was coming for them. The rope finally gave way after what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Elenna flexed her hands, wincing as blood flow returned in painful tingles. She stood slowly, testing her legs, orienting herself in the darkness. The cell door was iron-locked from the outside, but she remembered Crane's words about the rusted exterior door to the cellar. If she could get out of this cell, she could reach that door. And from there, she could tear this entire operation apart. She felt along the cell bars until she found what she was looking for, a weak point where rust had eaten away at the metal. It wasn't much, just a small gap, but it might be enough. She wedged her small knife into the space and began working it back and forth, applying leverage, feeling the metal groan under the pressure. Somewhere in the darkness, someone else was breathing. Another captive, she realized, maybe more than one. "Who's there?" a voice whispered, young female, terrified. "Someone who's getting out," Elenna whispered back. "And when I do, you're coming with me." "That's impossible. No one escapes Harrow." "I did once. I'll do it again." The bar gave a little rust, flaking away. "What's your name?" "Sarah. I've been here 3 weeks. I don't know how much longer I can—" "Sarah, listen to me. I need you to be quiet and be ready. When I open this cell, we're going to move fast. Can you do that?" A pause, then, "Yes." "Good. Stay strong just a little longer." Elenna redoubled her efforts on the bar, feeling it weaken further. Just a bit more pressure, a bit more leverage, and The bar snapped with a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. Elenna froze, listening, but no alarm was raised. The guards above were too confident, too comfortable in their assumption of control. She squeezed through the gap, tearing her shirt, but making it through. Free of the cell, she moved through the darkness toward where Sarah's voice had come from, counting her steps, using the sound of breathing as a guide. "I'm here," she whispered, reaching the neighboring cell. This lock was simpler, just a basic mechanism. Elenna worked at it with her knife, feeling for the tumblers, and after several tense moments, it clicked open. Sarah emerged, a shadow among shadows. "How did you—" "Later. How many others are down here?" "4, maybe 5. I can't see them all." "We're taking them all with us." Elenna moved to the next cell, then the next, methodically freeing each captive. There were 6 in total, 4 women and 2 men, all in various states of malnutrition and despair. But when Elenna told them they were leaving, something flickered to life in their eyes. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the desperate desire to believe escape was possible. "The door out is at the far end," Elenna whispered. "Dad, when we get there, we move fast and quiet. Stay together, stay low. If shooting starts, you run. Don't look back, don't try to help, just run. Understand?" They nodded, too frightened to speak. Elenna led them through the darkness, one hand trailing along the stone wall, counting steps, until she felt the change in texture that indicated a doorway. The rusted door Crane had mentioned, she could smell the oxidized metal, could feel the age of it under her fingers. She pushed, and the door groaned but didn't budge. Rust had sealed it partially shut. She pushed harder, throwing her weight against it, and with a shriek of protesting metal, it swung open. Cool night air rushed in, and Elenna had never been so grateful for the smell of the desert. She ushered the captives through, emerging into a narrow space between the cellar entrance and the compound's outer wall. Above them, lamplight spilled from windows, voices carried on the night breeze. "The main gate is too well guarded," Elenna whispered. "But there's a weak point in the wall to the east." Crane mentioned it, probably didn't think I'd be in a position to use the information. She led them along the wall, moving in shadow, every sense alert. They were halfway to the weak point when a shout went up behind them. Someone had discovered the empty cells. "Run!" Elenna hissed, and they bolted. The compound erupted into chaos. Guards poured out of buildings, lamps blazed to life, and gunshots cracked through the night. Elenna pushed the others ahead of her, making herself the rear guard, the shield between them and pursuit. They reached the weak point, a section where the wall had partially collapsed and been poorly repaired. Elenna helped the first captive over, then the second, working fast, while bullets zinged past. She felt one tug at her sleeve, another kick up dust at her feet, but she didn't stop. The last captive, Sarah, was halfway over when a guard rounded the corner. He raised his rifle, drawing a bead on the girl, and Elenna threw her knife without hesitation. It caught him in the throat, and he went down gurgling. "Go!" Elenna shouted, and Sarah disappeared over the wall. Elenna started to follow, but a hand grabbed her ankle and yanked her back. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs, and looked up to see Silas Crane standing over her with a gun pointed at her head. "Thought you were clever, didn't you?" he snarled. "Harrow's going to pay me double for bringing you back." Elenna's hand closed around a stone. "You made one mistake, Crane." "What's that? You should have made sure Takakota was dead." She threw the stone at his face, and as he flinched, an arrow sprouted from his shoulder, spinning him around. Takakota emerged from the darkness like an avenging spirit, blood staining his shirt, but very much alive. He knocked another arrow, this one aimed at Crane's heart. "You shot me," Takakota said calmly. "That was unwise." Crane's eyes went wide with fear. "Wait, I can—" Elenna didn't let him finish. She swept his legs out from under him, and as he fell, she caught the gun from his hand. When he hit the ground, she stood over him, the weapon pointed between his eyes. "You sold us out for money," she said. "You would have sent me back to that hell for profit." "Please," Crane gasped. "I waited for you to say that." Elena's voice was ice. You know what's funny? That's exactly what I said to Harrow over and over. Please stop. Please let me go. Please kill me. But he never did. She cocked the gun. I'm not Harrow. I'm ending this. The shot echoed across the compound, and Silas Crane lay still. Elenna didn't pause to process what she'd done. She turned to Takakota, relief flooding through her. You're alive. Harder to kill than they thought. He grimaced, hand pressed to his side. The bullet grazed my ribs. Painful, but not fatal. I've been tracking you since they took you. The others, the captives, are running toward freedom, which is what we should be doing. This place will be swarming with guards any second. But Elenna shook her head. No, I'm not leaving. Not until Harrow's dead. Elenna, he's here in that building. She pointed to the main house, the largest structure in the compound. I can feel it. This ends tonight, Takakota, one way or another. Takakota studied her face, then nodded slowly. Then we finish it. Together. They moved through the chaos toward the main house. Guards were running everywhere, trying to organize a response, trying to understand what was happening. In the confusion, two more shadows slipping through the darkness went unnoticed. The house was surprisingly quiet inside, as if the violence outside was happening in another world. Elenna moved through rooms she'd never seen, but somehow knew Harrow's domain, the place where he planned his cruelties and counted his profits. They found him in his office on the second floor, calmly loading a revolver as if he'd been expecting them. Jacob Harrow looked older than Elenna remembered, his hair grayer, his face more lined, but his eyes held the same cold calculation, the same absolute certainty in his own power. Elenna Rae, he said, not looking up from his gun. I wondered when you'd finally make it here. You've caused me considerable trouble, you know. Killing my associates, freeing my property, disrupting my operations. Your property, Elenna's voice shook with rage. We're human beings, not livestock. Semantics. He finished loading the gun and set it on Barasim's desk, still within reach. The market doesn't care what you call it. There's always been a demand for certain services, certain goods. I simply facilitate the supply. You're a slaver, a murderer, a monster. I'm a businessman. Harrow finally looked at her, and something like disappointment crossed his face. You could have made me a fortune if you'd been more compliant. Such spirit, such fire. Clients would have paid premium prices for you. Elenna felt bile rise in her throat. You branded me, marked me like cattle. Yes, well, inventory management is important in any enterprise. He said it so casually, as if discussing the weather. The brand ensures no one forgets who they belong to. I don't belong to anyone. Elenna drew her remaining knife. I never did. Oh, my dear, you're wrong about that. You belong to me the moment my men delivered you. You'll always belong to me even if you kill me. That brand on your shoulder, it's not just a mark. It's a chain around your soul. He smiled. You can't escape what you are. For a moment, doubt flickered through Elenna. Was he right? Had she become so defined by what had been done to her that she could never be free? Was the brand more than just scar tissue? Was it a permanent corruption of her spirit? Then she remembered the cave, the training, the nights by the fire with Takakota. She remembered choosing to fight rather than die. Remembered the strength she'd found in herself, the woman she'd become. You're wrong, she said quietly. The brand is just a scar. It's proof that I survived you, that I endured. And scars fade, Harrow, but death is permanent. She lunged, but Harrow was faster than his age suggested. He grabbed the revolver from his desk and fired. The bullet caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around, and she hit the wall hard. Takakota's arrow took Harrow in the arm, forcing him to drop the gun, but he pulled a knife from his belt and advanced on Elenna. I should have killed you years ago, he snarled. Should have recognized you were too much trouble to keep alive. Elenna struggled to her feet, blood streaming from her shoulder, vision swimming, but she refused to go down. Not now, not when she was so close. You had your chance. she gasped. "You should have taken it." Harrow slashed at her, and she barely dodged the blade, opening a cut across her ribs. Pain exploded through her, but she channeled it, used it, let it fuel her movement. She'd trained through pain, had learned to embrace it rather than fear it. She caught his wrist on his next strike, twisted it the way Takakota had taught her, and heard the satisfying crack of breaking bone. Harrow screamed, the knife falling from his grip, and Elenna caught it before it hit the ground. They stood there, locked together, his broken wrist in her hand, her knife at his throat. "Do it," he wheezed. "You want to. I can see it in your eyes. You're just like me, willing to do whatever it takes to survive." "No," Elenna said, and she meant it. "I'm nothing like you. You destroy lives for profit. I'm just evening the scales. There's no difference. We're both killers. The difference is I can still choose to stop, can still choose mercy." She pressed the blade closer to his skin, drawing a thin line of blood. "Can you?" Harrow laughed, a horrible wheezing sound. "Mercy from you? You've killed 5 men to get to me. You're as much a monster as I am." "Maybe," Elenna admitted, "but at least I'll be a monster who sleeps at night." She pulled the knife away from his throat, stepped back. "I could kill you right now. Would be easy, would be justified, but I'm not going to." Harrow's eyes widened with something that might have been hope. "You're letting me live." "No, I'm letting you face justice. Real justice, not the kind you buy with bribes." She looked at Takakota. "The compound is secure now. The guards have scattered. We can hold him here until the federal marshals arrive." "You think the law will touch me?" Harrow sneered. "I own half the judges in 3 territories. I'll be free within a week." "Maybe," Elenna said, "but those captives you held, they're free now, spreading word about what you've done. And the marshals who aren't corrupt will be very interested in a slaver operating this openly. Your empire is crumbling, Harrow. Even if you escape legal justice, you're finished." For the first time, true fear crossed Harrow's face. Not fear of death, he'd probably made peace with that possibility long ago, but fear of losing his power, his control, everything he'd built. That fear was enough for Elenna. But Takakota stepped forward, his expression grim. "He won't face justice. Men like him never do. They buy their way out, intimidate witnesses, disappear, and rebuild somewhere else." He looked at Elenna. "This is your choice, but I'm telling you, if you let him live, he'll hurt more people, and their blood will be on your hands." Elenna looked at Harrow, at this man who'd destroyed her life and countless others. Takakota was right, the law was corrupt. Justice was for sale, and Harrow would probably escape any real consequences. But if she killed him now in cold blood, would she be any better than he was? Where was the line between justice and murder, between righteousness and revenge? She thought of her father, of the brand on her shoulder, of the 2 years she'd spent in darkness and degradation. She thought of Sarah and the other captives, of all the people Harrow had trafficked and tortured, and she made her choice. "You're right," she said to Takakota. Then she looked at Harrow. "You don't deserve my mercy. You don't deserve my hate. You deserve nothing." And she drove the knife into his heart. Harrow's eyes went wide, his mouth working soundlessly. He clutched at the blade at her, but his strength was already fading. Blood spread across his expensive shirt, across the floor, pooling beneath him. "This is for my father," Elenna whispered. "For every person you destroyed, for every life you ruined. You said I'd always belong to you, but you were wrong. I'm free. I've always been free. You just couldn't see it." Harrow collapsed the light, leaving his eyes, and Elenna stepped back. She'd done it. After everything, after all the pain and training and hunting, it was over. The brand on her shoulder didn't hurt anymore. The chains that had bound her spirit fell away, invisible but real. She was free. Takakota caught her as her legs gave out her injuries, finally demanding attention. "We need to go," he said gently. "The fire will cover our tracks." "Fire." He gestured to the lamp he'd knocked over, flames already spreading across the expensive rug climbing the curtains. "This place needs to burn, all of it, every trace of what happened here. Elenna nodded weakly. He was right. This compound, this monument to human suffering, needed to be erased from the earth. They stumbled out of the building as flames roared behind them, consuming Harrow's empire. The guards who remained fled rather than fight the blaze. The captives were long gone, running toward whatever freedom they could find. Takakota got Elenna on a horse, her shoulder still bleeding but not fatally. They rode away from the compound, away from the flames and smoke and the smell of burning corruption. They rode until dawn, until the compound was nothing but a distant column of smoke on the horizon. Only then did they stop, and Takakota tended her wounds properly, binding her shoulder and ribs with cloth torn from his own shirt. "It's over," he said. "Yes." Elenna agreed, and the word tasted like freedom. They made their way slowly back toward the desert, toward the cave where Elenna had been reborn. But they didn't stop there. Instead, they continued on, following a river. Takakota knew, until they found a place where the water ran clear and the land was untouched by violence. "Here," Takakota said, "we could build something here, a cabin, a life, something new." Elenna looked at the river, at the way sunlight danced on its surface, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the acceptance of it. The knowledge that scars were proof of survival, not symbols of shame. "Yes," she said, "let's build something." Over the following months, they constructed a small cabin by the water. Elenna planted herbs and vegetables, remembering skills her father had taught her. Takakota carved wood and hunted game, providing for them both. They lived quietly, two souls who'd been broken by the world, but had refused to stay that way. One night, as they sat by the river watching stars emerge, Elenna said, "I have nothing left to give except myself." Takakota took her hand, his thumb tracing the scars on her wrist. "You were never lost. You were only waiting." He leaned in and kissed her slow, certain free. It was a kiss without desperation, without need. Just two people choosing to be together, choosing to build rather than destroy. Their scars remained visible reminders of everything they'd endured, but they no longer hurt. The brand on Elenna's shoulder was just tissue and memory, now no longer a chain but a testament. She'd survived, she'd fought, she'd won. And now finally she could live. Not the broken existence of mere survival, but a real life filled with quiet mornings and shared work and the possibility of joy. She grew stronger each day, her body healing her spirit, settling into something resembling contentment. Sometimes at night the nightmares still came. She would wake gasping, reaching for weapons that weren't there, fighting enemies who no longer existed. But Takakota was always there, his presence anchoring her back to reality. "You're safe," he would remind her. "You're free, and you're not alone." And gradually the nightmares came less frequently, until weeks would pass without them. One morning, nearly a year after Harrow's death, Elenna stood barefoot in the river washing clothes and realized she was humming. An old song her father used to sing, one she'd thought she'd forgotten. The melody rose from somewhere deep inside a piece of herself she'd thought was lost forever. She wasn't the ranch girl anymore. That person had died in fire and chains. But she wasn't the hunter either, the woman driven by rage and the need for vengeance. She was someone new, someone forged from both those versions of herself, but defined by neither. She was simply Elenna, scarred, yes, changed, certainly, but alive and free and choosing every day to keep living. Takakota joined her in the river, taking the wet clothes from her hands and hanging them to dry. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That healing isn't forgetting," she replied, echoing words he'd spoken to her long ago. "It's remembering and choosing to live anyway." He smiled, that rare expression that transformed his usually stoic face. "You've learned well. I had a good teacher." They stood there in the river water flowing around them, the sun warm on their shoulders. The past was behind them, written in scars and memories that would never fully fade. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of possibility. And in that moment, standing in the river, with the man who'd saved her by teaching her to save herself, Elenna Rae understood a truth that had taken years to learn. Some chains are made of iron, but others are made of fear and shame and the belief that you're less than human. The iron chains could be broken with tools and strength, but the others, those required something harder. They required you to look at yourself and choose to be whole again, scars and all. She had made that choice. Every day she continued to make it. And that was the greatest victory of all. Not the deaths of her enemies, but the reclaiming of her own life, her own identity, her own power to determine who she would be. The brand still marked her shoulder, but it no longer defined her. It was just another scar now, no more or less significant than the others she'd collected. A reminder of what she'd survived. Yes, but also proof that survival was possible, that transformation was real, that even the most broken things could be made whole again if given time and care and the courage to heal. Elenna took Takakota's hand, lacing their fingers together, and they walked back to the cabin they'd built, their home, their sanctuary, their fresh start. Behind them, the river continued its eternal flow, washing away the past and carrying them toward whatever future they would choose to create together.